Mi nombre es Jennifer Alvarado. Estoy relacionada a Compasión Internacional desde que tenía 5 años. Formé como médica. Ahora soy gastroenteróloga infantil.
Depende del día. ¿Las atiendo?
A un niño patrocinado te cambia la vida. Te la cambia así. O sea, eres otra persona. Tienes tantas oportunidades. No vale la pena. Son tantas cosas que me pasaron en mi niñez, muy duras, pero que me puedo capaz identificar con muchos niños. Pero la diferencia es que yo nunca estuve sola. Compasión te hace un clic, te cambia. Es la que te ayuda a ser diferente, a tener a Cristo en tu corazón desde que eres niño, a tener valores y a ser una persona en el futuro diferente. Es bastante pesado ser mamá, ser esposa, ser médica y trabajar de forma presencial, trabajar por medio de telesalud. Hay días que estoy cansada. Es como un boomerang. Dieron y ahora vuelve.
Hey there, friends. My name is Mike Penenga, and I am coming to you from one of my favorite lookouts in my hometown of Kelowna, British Columbia. I spent 18 years pastoring at 2 churches here in Kelowna, which is where I came to know and love the work of Compassion. And not that long ago, I had the privilege to join the team of Compassion Canada to help build bridges between Canadians who want to do good, who want to have an impact, and the work of Compassion, which is releasing children from poverty in Jesus' name. Now, just up this valley, about 7 minutes, is the school that I went to as a kid. And when I was in grade 1, our teacher thought it would be great to take us on a field trip. No, we didn't go to a museum or an aquarium or a science center or some other cool activity. We went to the local grocery store. And we were asked as grade 1 students to bring $1. Now, back then it was actually a dollar bill. I know I am that old. But our teacher wanted to teach us a lesson to learn the value of a dollar. She wanted us to wrestle with the many things that we could do with the dollar and to watch what we would choose to spend it on. So just imagine for a moment, if you could, a class of 36-year-olds wandering around a grocery store, eyeing up all the things they could get for $1. And I watched as my friends found the candy section. You could get a decent amount of treats for $1 back then. But you see, I grew up Dutch, and I wanted to stretch my dollar as far as it could possibly go, even as a 6-year-old. And so I walked around the store and I discovered that with my $1, I could get 5 apples. Now remember, we live here in the Okanagan Valley. There are literally orchards everywhere. Apples are not hard to come by. But in my 6-year-old mind, 5 apples was a worthwhile return for my $1 investment, because there are 5 people in my family. And this way I thought everyone could benefit from my $1. So I came home that day so proud to show my mom of these 5 apples, because in my mind, I had invested my dollar well. I had taken what was in my hand and I'd put it to what I felt was good use. Now you may have a sense of where I am going with this, because the Bible is filled with stories of God inviting His people to take what's in their hand and to put it for work for His purposes. You know, 3 stories come to mind really easily. You probably can think of a lot more. I recall an 80-year-old shepherd named Moses who was hanging out with some sheep when he saw something that just caught his attention. It was a bush on fire. But the amazing thing was this fire did not consume the bush, because God was using it to get Moses' attention. And God asked Moses this very question. You can read it for yourself in Exodus chapter 4. God says to Moses, "What's in your hand?" And I've learned over the years that when God asks a question, it isn't for His benefit, but for ours. He already knows the answer. He wants to see if you and I know the answer. So Moses looks at his hand, and you know what he finds there is a staff. It's just a walking stick. It's really a simple piece of wood. But that staff to Moses represented so much more. It represented Moses' identity. People knew that he was a shepherd because he carried this shepherd's staff, and it represented his income. That's how Moses made his money, by shepherding sheep. And thirdly, it represented his influence. This is how Moses influenced the sheep to go where he wanted them to. He would tap them or guide them gently using this staff. And so God looks at Moses and he says to Moses, take what you have in your hand. Take your staff, which is your identity and your income and your influence, and throw it down on the ground. And you probably remember what happens next. It's in Exodus 4. That staff turns into a snake. That's kind of cool. And then God told Moses to pick it back up again by the tail, and the snake turned back into a staff. But this is something that I missed for so many years. From that point on, it was never referred to as Moses' staff. Do you know what it was called from then on? It was called the rod of God. It was the rod of God that was used to part the Red Sea, to perform miracles in front of Pharaoh, and to make water come out of a rock. It was still just a simple stick. There was nothing magical about it. But once Moses surrendered it to God, it became the rod of God. So what's in your hand? Fast forward a few hundred years, another shepherd boy, this one a teenager named David. This story is found in 1 Samuel 17. One day David is sent to visit his brothers on the battlefield, and he finds out that they are paralyzed by fear of this giant named Goliath. It's a good reason to be paralyzed as well, because Goliath was massive, over 9 feet tall. His armor alone weighed 125 pounds. So what does David do? I love this. He does what every good teenage boy would do. Let me at him. I'll fight him. And David looks at what he has in his hands. It's a slingshot. It was another tool for a shepherd to ward off enemies of the flock. In his hand, it was a slingshot and 5 stones to face a 9-foot armed killer. And you probably know how this story goes. 1 stone straight to the forehead kills the giant. Victory. Because David was willing to offer back to God this simple tool in his hand. So what's in your hand? One more story, probably my favorite. It's one of the few stories recorded in all 4 Gospels, so it should get our attention. We see it in the Gospel of John chapter 6. Jesus was teaching to thousands of people on a hillside, and it was getting late. And the disciples said to Jesus, hey, send the people home so they can get something to eat. And Jesus said this, you feed them. I would have loved to see their expression. The disciples said, well, it would take more than half a year's wages to buy enough bread for each one to have a bite. But one disciple, Andrew, I love Andrew, he brought a boy to Jesus. And he said, here's a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish. But how far will they go among so many? It's just $1, Jesus. What can you do with $1? It's just a shepherd's staff. It's just a slingshot. It's just a small lunch. What can you do with that? Well, in the boy's hands, it is just lunch. But in Jesus' hands, it's provision for the multitude. Again, you probably know what happens next. Jesus takes what is given him. He blesses it. He multiplies it. He passes it around. And this is the best part of the story. I love this. In the end, there is more left over than there was at the start, because that's how the economy of Jesus' kingdom works. Now, picture for a minute what the scene would have been like as the disciples began asking around for food. I imagine there were some who would have hid what they had, because the people there thought that if they gave, they would have less. But this boy was willing to offer what was in his hands to Jesus. And only then did he discover that there was more left over, 12 basketfuls of leftover bread than this kid had brought in the first place. And I know this part isn't in the Bible, so forgive me, but imagine he goes home that evening and his mom asks, hey, how was your lunch? And this boy breaks into the biggest grin. Mom, it was amazing. My lunch fed thousands today. And then one step further, imagine Jesus comes back through that town. Don't you think that boy would be the first in line to offer whatever he had? Because he had seen what Jesus had done before, and he was not going to miss what he was about to do next. So what's in your hands? It's really the question that Jesus asks all of us. And the truth is, we can hide it or deny it or minimize it. But what if doing that means that we miss out on being part of God's miracle work in our midst? Fast forward again to the early 1950s, a Christ follower named Everett Swanson followed God's call to South Korea to preach the gospel to the army troops. And while he was there, he was deeply impacted by the children orphaned by war. It's as if God placed this question on Everett's heart: what's in your hands? And so Everett Swanson began raising funds to help, developed a sponsorship program to support these orphan kids for a few dollars a month. And I can guarantee you, friends, that Everett Swanson would have no idea that what God birthed in and through him in 1952, 70 years later, would result in more than 2.2 million kids in 25 countries, supported through the work of 8,000 frontline church partners and thousands of people like you and me, because that's what God can do. You know, I share today when we are still in the midst of a global pandemic. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. And while you've probably heard this phrase, we're all in this together, the simple truth is not everyone is experiencing the pandemic the same way. Yes, we're all in the storm, but we are definitely in different boats. And for those who Compassion serves in these developing countries, COVID has simply multiplied what was already a very difficult situation. You know, malaria hasn't gone away, natural disasters haven't stopped, the need for clean water hasn't diminished, and this is where Compassion is stepping up to help in increasing ways. Take a look at this video which illustrates how and why this matters.
Niho yavuye kunywa araza abazukuru be niho baje avuga ati siba nabanje mu kuza kwera ndacyate umva kirambabaje kandi adasibaga kuko niho navuze guhera ubu munsi ngiye gufata abana banje ngende iwacu.
COVID-19 pandemic came with many challenges. Winifred was one of the members who actually faced the lockdown in another different way. Because whereas other people are crying, they don't have what to eat. For her, she even lost her house.
Inzu yamaze kugwa nje mwamabukwe namazemo hafi wiki ebyiri. Avuga ati siba nabanje mu kuza kwera ndacyateka umva kirambabaje kandi adasibaga kuri. Point yo nari ngeze ku point yo kuvuga ngo niyahure nangamo kimwe intabana n'ikende.
They had lost hope. As a project, we intervened, and the solution to this problem was to have the house constructed.
Nagiye kubona mbona umusigo wa mbere.
Along the way, as the house is being completed, Austin's dad starts returning home slowly because the shame is gone and he's seeing a new structure being put up. Austin's dad listens to the gospel, gives his life to Christ, and he is now reunited with his family.
Kuko ubwo nawe hari icyo yize mu rugo buzima bwe yabayemo, hari icyo yasomyemo. Austin yatanditse kubona nkuyemo umufarisi. Aravuga ngo ma tikarame ngo ugiye he titugiye mu ngo tugiye mu nzu ngi yafashe twashoboye akagenda araterurana bimwe n'ibyatashoboye.
Whole community in Muganza looked at this and they are saying there is power in transformation.
I love that line, there is power in transformation. Isn't that true? And transformation is possible when individuals take what is in their hand and offer it back to God. You know, one of the things I have come to appreciate most about how Compassion does its work is the central role of the local church. We don't dictate what projects need to be done. We respond to the practical needs on the ground, determined and walked out by the local church. These needs could include rebuilding a house like you saw in that video, or providing rent for a family that's at risk of losing their housing, or providing food for families that can't afford it due to job loss because they're day laborers in a pandemic. Sponsorship is effective and beautiful and needed, and for those of you who support a child or 2 or 10 through Compassion, thank you. You are making a huge difference. But I have come to discover an ever-increasing need that is arising for disaster relief funding, and they're necessary and can have an even larger impact on the child and their family and the community. And the invitation for you today is to say yes to partnering in this way during a season where it is so desperately needed. I love the name of Compassion because it literally means love in action. Love must take action. Otherwise, it's just pity. So, friends, it comes back to this. What will you do with your $1? What will you have to show for it? What impact will come from it? May I encourage you to lay it down, to offer it back, and to watch what God does in and through you for His kingdom purposes.
Hey, Six Line. So I got my family here to help us as we wrap up our teaching time. A year ago, we invited Compassion to come, but COVID hit, and well, you know the rest of that story. And so this year we invited them back to be able to share a bit of who they are, and so you've been listening to them. And at this moment I invited my family to come because we've had some personal experience with them, and so I want to be able to ask them to share a bit of their experience. So I'm going to pass it off to my wife, Gary Ann, who is going to lead the family, and Gary, maybe you can share a bit on what our experience has been like as a family, what's been good about it.
First of all, I'm just going to ask my kids a couple questions. I'll get to know our sponsor child. So what is the name of our sponsor child?
Duma Bernard.
How old is he?
16.
Great. Where does he live?
The community of Torbeck in Haiti.
And what do they speak? What language?
Creole.
Creole. That's right. We've been sponsoring our child's Duma since 2009. We originally found out about Compassion at a concert at our church, and they had a display of pictures of families or of kids that needed to be sponsored. I picked the child that was closest in age to the triplets, so they're a year apart. So these guys are 15, Duma is 16. Every year he writes us 4 or 5 times. We write him back. We do Christmas cards and birthday cards. We give him extra money at Christmas, his family, and also at birthdays. The one thing there's a couple stories that stick out to me. One was we gave him money for his birthday, and then the next letter that he sent, he showed us a picture of his new shoes that he bought with the money that we gave him. And then we give this family money for Christmas, and the one year they bought a goat. This was several years ago. And then about 3 or 4 years ago they had a hurricane and they lost their goat. So we sent them money and they bought a new goat. Is this really cool? And goats are important for them. They can get milk and earn money and stuff. Their parents have, I think, some animals and do agricultural things.
Why has it been good for us as a family? What do you guys think? We didn't ask you before. That's okay. Maybe Gary, mom could speak to that.
Well, because they were so close in age, basically since the triplets could speak, they've been praying for Duma pretty much every supper meal. And then once Jesse came into our lives, he found out about Duma. And every time we read letters together as a family when we get them at supper. And usually I write the letters every month to Duma, or every couple months to Duma. But we definitely tell him about school and about life here and the weather and some of our favorite activities. So our kids have really grown up with knowing about Duma and his community and what that's like for them. Him.
So one of the things I really like about Compassion is it's church, it works out of the church. So it's not an organization coming outside in, is they work alongside a church. And so the local church for our example, in the town that he lives in Haiti, that church is the one ministering to the locals in town. And so Compassion works through the local church. And there's some great research showing about the value of such programs, and it covers everything from spiritual lives to education to work careers, and as you heard earlier today. And so it's close to our hearts, it's close to my heart. I think it's a great organization. If you want to learn more about it, we're going to put up on our website, on our blog today. So if you go sixlinechurch.com/blog, click on today's date, May 16th, and you can learn some more about Compassion Canada, and if you got questions, be able to go from there. At this point, I'm going to pass it off to Aaron as he's leading us in worship today.